Tonight on Primetime Politics, temporary layoff. GM Canada halts production at its Kami assembly plant in Ingersoll, Ontario, citing the market and inventory. But did the Trump tariffs influence the decision? We'll examine the issue. And
just convened the Canada-U.S. committee, had a good long discussion on several aspects.
Mark Carney suspends his campaign and dons the Prime Minister's mantle for the third time in this election. But is he playing politics by doing so? The bureau chiefs will weigh in. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, we begin tonight with a developing story that we are tracking for you out of Ingersoll, Ontario. This is where hundreds of auto workers are now dealing with some difficult news, told earlier today by GM Canada that as of Monday, its Kami assembly plant would be temporarily suspended. Kami is Canada's first full-scale electric manufacturing plant. It is also where the company makes the Bright Drop electric vehicle, a delivery van that GM says suffers from less than expected demand. Just one reason cited for the decision to halt production, at least for now. Well, workers at the Ingersoll plant are represented by Unifor, this country's largest private sector union. Lana Payne is the national president, and she joins us right now. Lana, thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Listen, I was just wondering, was there any warning whatsoever that these layoffs would be coming down?
I mean, the reality is that there have been slow sales of the electric vans. We've known this, but there are a number of contributing factors right now. The sales being one, changing EV policy, electric vehicle policy in the United States is certainly playing a role. And of course, there's no way to untangle this from the crushing impact of tariffs and what that's going to do and is doing to demand and to forecasts for electric vehicles, but for everything right now.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you mentioned the tariffs because according to GM, this has nothing to do with tariffs, but obviously you believe that it comes part and parcel with this decision.
Yeah, of course. You can't look down the road and look at what it is you're building and not understand that the tariffs are going to have an impact on that. They are having an impact. They are going to continue to have an impact. If you look at the North American industry right now, the costs of these tariffs on the industry are about $100 billion. That is not something that these automakers can absorb. The result is that demand is also going down. There are projections that sales could drop as much as 1.3 to 1.8 million vehicles in Canada and the United States. That's nearly 8 assembly plants, in terms of what we're facing. This is devastating for the industry, and we have a president of the United States that seems driven to want to crush the North American auto industry right now.
Mm-hmm. Can you walk us through what workers are being told? This temporary shutdown starts Monday, but what happens afterwards?
So Monday, they will be temporarily laid off for a couple of weeks. They will come back in May to fulfill an order that General Motors has for electric vans for a customer. Then later in May, the plant will shut down until October. And when it comes back in October, we are told it will be only with one shift. And that means nearly half the workforce will not have a job there at that time. And it is devastating for them. It is devastating for their families and their coworkers and for the community of Ingersoll and surrounding area. This is just awful today, and I wish I could say it's the end of it, but I don't believe that it is. We are facing a massive problem here right now.
So where does that leave you and Unifor? What will you be doing in response to this, Lana?
Well, two things. First of all, we're going to continue to push the company, General Motors, to do whatever it can do in terms of product for this facility. and mitigating the layoffs. And secondly, we are going to continue to push both the federal and provincial government to make sure that when we have industrial policy in this country and we create industrial policy, which is what we're going to need to get through this trade war, that we're matching procurement up with it. And that means these two things have to go hand in hand. And right now, there is an opportunity to support the workers at CAMI with government procurement. And I can give you an example. Canada Post is looking to buy electric vans for its fleet, to replace its aging fleet, and that should be done in Ingersoll.
Well, I appreciate the fact that this is not easy news for you and the members of your union to be hearing. Lana, I appreciate the time this evening. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, let's bring in Brian Kingston to the conversation. He is the president and the CEO of the Canadian Vehicles Manufacturers Association. Brian, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, you know, in announcing this temporary shutdown for the CAMI plant, GM cites low sales and high inventory, but apparently not the Trump tariffs. What can you say about that?
Yeah, this is directly related to the EV market right now. And if you think back to even just a couple of years ago, there were very ambitious and bold forecasts about EV adoption and uptake across North America. And what we've seen is that that just hasn't come to pass. There has not been as much demand as anticipated. Good news here, though, is that this plant is the only plant in the world that is building this vehicle. And this vehicle is popular, and as we see more and more fleets greening, this is a vehicle that I think is going to see significant uptake. So it's unfortunate to see the news today, but we just are not seeing the evolution of the EV market progress as expected.
Okay, not the evolution, but you know, you couple that with what we're hearing from Donald Trump, and here we have a president who is not as enthusiastic about vehicle mandates as was his predecessor, Joe Biden. Is North America moving away from the EV future?
No, but it's definitely taking longer than expected. And, you know, if you just look at what's happened in Canada over the past few months, I mean, we had a $5,000 incentive in place for EV drivers, EV purchasers. That disappeared extremely rapidly, virtually overnight. Charging infrastructure has not kept up with the rates necessary to support widespread adoption. So, you know, the federal government has mandated 100% EV sales by 2035. That is completely unrealistic and is becoming more so every single day. That said, manufacturers have put billions of dollars into electrification. This is happening, but it won't happen on the timeline that we originally thought.
Okay, so if not on the timeline that we thought, I'm wondering about other impacts to other assembly plants, because of course Stellantis was the first one to suspend temporarily its shifts. We now have Ingersoll. What about Oshawa? What about Brampton? Brampton in particular has already been paused because they were going to retool for an EV future. Will we see more shifts being lost, more layoffs being announced?
Well, this all comes down to what happens between Canada and the United States. I mean, the tariffs are a huge challenge. There remains mass uncertainty around how the tariffs are even being applied here to Canadian-produced vehicles. And of course, U.S. trade policy is shifting on an almost daily basis. And so this makes it really difficult for an industry that has long planning horizons and makes investments for the long term. So we need to get to the table with the Americans, find a way to negotiate out of these tariffs and keep this Canadian footprint thriving. But until we get to that point, it will be an uncertain period over the next few weeks.
Okay, I don't know if this goes to your point, but you know, we did hear, or see rather, a report, and this was just yesterday, the Center for Automotive Research. They say that the Trump tariffs could cost the North American auto industry about $57 billion. That's in Canadian currency. They also say that the price of vehicles could go up anywhere from $5,000 to over $10,000, again in Canadian currency. What do you want officials in this country to take out of that report?
Yeah, I mean, this report just underlines how expensive the Trump trade policy is going to be for manufacturers. So there are a couple of things to take from it. I mean, first of all, for the Americans, they need to understand that what they're doing is damaging their own industry. Put aside the impacts on Canada and Mexico, manufacturers in America are going to be exposed to over $100 billion in cost. That does not set them up for long-term success, particularly as you see threats from automotive countries like China, which are producing at unprecedented levels. And then secondly, I think for Canadian policymakers, We have to have a better sense of what the EV transition is actually going to look like in the face of all of these costs. Federally mandated sales targets in an environment where vehicle prices are going to potentially be going up at these rates just don't make sense. We've got to make sure that we're setting this industry up for success, and mandating sales right now is absolutely the wrong approach.
Okay, well, what about procurement? Because there is a talk of perhaps what could help out this CAMI plant is if, for example, governments, crown corporations buy this type of EV commercial vehicle to support the local industry. Would that make an impact?
This would make a huge impact, and this is something that I think the federal government could do much more on, particularly right now in this very uncertain period. Just to give you an example of how slow the transition has been for government fleets, the Auditor General put out a report a couple of years ago that looked at the government's target to green their fleets. The target is to get to an 80% green federal fleet by 2030. According to the Auditor General, the government is at 3%. There has been virtually no progress in purchasing electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids for government fleets. And, you know, we have this amazing facility in Ingersoll that is producing the exact type of vehicle that governments will need, and we're not seeing major purchases from governments, not just the federal government, but municipalities and provinces. So I'd like to see more action on that front. It will help meet our carbon emission reduction targets, and it will support these industries and these plants through this very uncertain time.
Well, uncertain, as you say, looking for more decisions from Ottawa on this one. Brian Kingston, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, let's turn now to the election, because for the third time in as many weeks, the Liberal leader suspended his campaign today, convening a meeting of his Canada-U.S. Cabinet Committee to discuss the impact of the latest Trump tariff announcement that came down on Wednesday.
We reviewed our response to those tariffs, our core strategy of to fight, to protect, and to build. We left instructions for officials to ensure that the next government, whichever government Canadians choose, will be in the best possible position for negotiations with the United States, which, as the President and I have agreed, will begin from the start of May.
But despite the reasons listed by Mark Carney, the Liberal leader is being criticized for pausing his campaign for a third time, accused of donning the mantle of Prime Minister for political gain rather than dealing with a national crisis. Take a look at this social media post. It comes from Conservative Michael Chong. The latter part of his statement saying the following: "Your repeated use of the office of Prime Minister during the writ period amounts to putting your thumb on the scale of the electoral process." Well, for more on this, let's now bring in Robert Fife, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for LaPresse. Hello to all three of you.
Hello.
So here you have Mark Carney getting the chance to be prime ministerial by suspending his campaign once again. Conservatives calling this a bit of a political manipulation happening. Bob, what do you make of it?
Well, I think they're right. I mean, when we heard on Thursday that he was going to come back, to suspend his campaign to come back, it just didn't pass the smell test. On the other instance, when he came back to deal with serious issues of Trump imposing tariffs against Canada, clearly that was within the scope of him being the Prime Minister. None of the opposition parties had objected to him doing so. It was the right thing to do. But this thing on Friday really wasn't anything. I mean, he came back to talk to his cabinet and to tell officials to make sure that you put in some kind of a negotiating plan for whoever is the next prime minister. Really, you didn't need to come back to do that. And I think in some level, they knew that themselves, because when Mr. Carney came out on today and all he did was make a brief statement in French and English, and then he didn't take questions from reporters. So probably because people like Tonda would say, "Hey, what is this?"
Well, I did say that, as a matter of fact. I found myself barking at him as he left. Are you just campaigning now?
Yeah, well, and that's the point, though. Right? I mean, if you're trying to make a moment, all he did was give a statement in English, statement in French. very quick moment to be suspending a campaign for.
And there are questions to be asked of the government and of a prime minister in this role right now. There are big questions around how is this government engaging with China on the agricultural tariffs. Scott Moe, right after that cabinet meeting, I went down to scrum him at the conference downtown, and he said he thinks that the government ought to be engaging right now with China, and there are some steps being taken on the ambassador's part, but that he believes that, yes, sure, there's a campaign on, but just as Carney is trying to protect the auto and steel and aluminum sectors, he ought to be working on also protecting the agricultural sector. No questions asked, questions asked, no questions taken. And I think that showed, that was a misstep on Carney's part and on the Liberal campaign's part, actually. If you think you benefit from him looking prime ministerial, then act like a prime minister and take a couple of questions. I thought it was unacceptable today. And
that's a good point, because the fact of the matter is he has, in the course of this campaign 3 weeks in, seemed much more comfortable playing prime minister than he has campaigning as Liberal leader. What do you make of it?
Same diagnostic, that Mr. Carney is more at ease being prime minister or acting like prime minister than being actually a leader of the party who's seeking a mandate. And I guess most Liberals would wish that April 28th was yesterday, so that it could be already in motion and making decision and forming government. But there's still a campaign to go, and it's, in French we say, un passage obligé. It's an obligation to go through this process. You have to go until the end and not take advantage. And this was pretty much obvious to everyone that this is an occasion that Mr. Carney took just to show again that he can be prime ministerial, while the others cannot have the same occasion. So they want to throw the light on him as prime minister and not Liberal leader, because he made some mistakes as Liberal leader.
What was interesting to me outside cabinet today is there were a lot of officials that went into that room, not just ministers. There was a couple of ministers that seemed to be virtually participating, Dominic LeBlanc and François-Philippe Champagne, I believe. But there were a ton of officials that went through with locked binders and locked briefcases and bags of documents. So something got done there. We just have no clue what. And I think it does behoove a prime minister to tell an electorate during a campaign, as a trade war is unfolding, what steps you're taking. So big misstep there. And I guess I would just note that both Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Carney are in the National Capital Region now for the weekend, doing both some campaigning and then pivoting towards next week. And I just thought it was a weird way to end the week. Yeah, well, and weird, end the week, week 3, there's only, I was counting it up, only 2 weeks left and 2 days before Election Day itself, which is, we'll get there, Tonda, we'll get there. But, the numbers obviously still favoring the Liberals right now when you go to the polls. Joël-Denis, you talked about how Liberals would like the vote to be now. But, how quickly is the window closing on Conservatives to try to flip these numbers around? Is it even possible, Bob, do you think?
Oh, it's closing very fast on them. This week was basically a lost week for the Conservatives. Yes, they have been putting out policy, but you can feel the desperation in their campaign. Mr. Poilievre has increased his personal character assassination attacks on Mark Carney, saying that he's a grifter and that he's got a fake resume. This is kind of stuff that well, we're kind of used to it from Mr. Poilievre when he was in opposition, but during an election campaign, it reeks of desperation. And you think about it, the Liberals are way ahead. I mean, they're 5 points ahead, and he's 20 points ahead when you look at him in terms of preference for leader. And although the Conservatives have a pretty solid 38%, they haven't been able to grow their campaign. So they really only have one roll of the dice, and that's the debates that are coming up this week in French and in English. And and really the more important debate, and I think JD will agree with me, is the Tout le Monde one that's coming this Sunday, where Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Carney will be on separately. That's an opportunity to reach, a big segment of the Quebec population. But if Mr. Poilievre cannot be successful, particularly in the English debate, then I think he's doomed. And if he tries to go to the personal smear attacks, I think it's going to backfire.
Tonda, how quickly is the window closing on Conservatives?
I mean, the polls, you know, though there were supporters at a Carney rally this week saying, I don't, or do you believe, questioning the polls, do you believe the polls?
Polyev rally.
Conservatives. Yeah.
What did I
Polyev.
say?
Carney.
Carney. Polyev
Coffee.
rally. Coffee, please. Thank you for staying with me, though. I appreciate it. But no, the questioning of the polls across the board, across the country, which are, you know, poll after, it's not just one outlier poll. And to put that in question through not just some of the people showing up in sweatshirts, but a couple of candidates have also questioned the polls, and Mr. Polyev not directly answering that, shows you that they're a bit rattled right now. And they're trying to understand where things are going, but not changing course. And I think I've heard from Conservatives, there's a lot of, I would say, upset and frustration and fear about which way this is headed. They see it, they read the polls, and they actually do believe the polls. So I just think that it's been a week in which not only did we see some of those things Bob talked about it, but it showed Pierre Poilievre auditioning for the role of opposition leader, not for the role of prime minister. And I think that's where he's making a mistake. We'll see if he is able to pivot in these debates this week and show himself to Quebec to be somewhat different. But he's already tried to soften his image in Quebec, saying, you know, people think I'm a little,
yeah.
What's the word he used?
I can't remember the exact expression, but he was trying
I'm
to...
so direct, I'm so blunt.
Yeah.
Well, actually, you know, that can also translate, and, you know, Quebecers may find him mean, you know, so that's a calculated risk for him.
Yeah, and you know, for all the efforts he's put into Quebec since he became leader, it hasn't really seemed to bear out in this campaign. But how talk about the window and what's ahead of Mr. Polyev.
You know, try to reverse the trend that has been, you know, evident in the polls is, I'll ask the question following, how hard was it for the captain of the Titanic to switch before he hit the iceberg? That's how hard it is for a Conservative Party, to me, in my sense, because the trend has been, you know, pretty much in the last few days and since the campaign has begun. And Canadians are focused on one thing, the relationship, the future relationship between Canada and the United States, how to deal with Donald Trump, and they're looking for a prime minister who will be able to stand up to him. And that's the main focus. We've seen that in the poll in LaPresse and the Global Mail this week from Nanos, and that was the focus of most Canadians. One out of the two Canadians, this will guide their vote coming up on the 28th of April. It's unheard of that the external factor will influence so much the current campaigns. No matter what promises the parties make during this campaign, it's been overshadowed by Donald Trump.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, we just passed the halfway mark, as I said, a couple weeks left, but I want to get a sense from you, as we've been covering this this campaign. What has been a big win or a big fail or both? I just have to do it quickly. For each one of you, when you think about any of the party, any of the leaders that you've seen so far.
I think the big fail for Mark Carney is his refusal to make sure that we know what he has got declared as a conflict of interest. We don't know how much money he's worth. We don't know what's in the blind trust. We don't know what property or anything. We know nothing about the financial disclosures that we do know for every other political leader because they're in Parliament. And before this election is over, we should see that. But clearly they're dragging their feet on that. And I think that is a failure of leadership.
Okay. Tonda?
I thought we were going to do best and worst moments.
Best worst moments.
Well, look, I'll say this because I haven't written about it, but it's been reported by lots of folks. But I do now, at this point in the campaign, find it appalling the treatment of the reporters and media following the Conservative campaign, attempting to follow it. Mr. Poilievre, in a news conference this week, 25 meters away from where the reporters were kept at bay behind a wall, behind a pen, when a reporter tried to ask a follow-up question, knowing that nobody could see who it was, a reporter, called that reporter a protester and tried to quash the follow-ups and pretend like he was being heckled, knowing full well because he could see what was going on. And I just get this, the whole inaccessibility of the Conservative leader. I find that undemocratic and unaccountable in the middle of a campaign. The Liberal and NDP leaders have answered more than twice the number of questions Mr. Poilievre has answered in this campaign. And I find it's a lack of accountability, and it, I think, bodes badly for if he does turn around his campaign and forms government.
Joël-Denis?
To me, I think the biggest failure was Mr. Poilievre's failure to present any team. It's been a one-man show, the Conservative Party only. I could not name who could be finance minister in Mr. Poilievre's government because he hasn't presented anybody. There was the finance minister of Quebec, Éric Girard, wanted to run for the Conservative Party. Mr. Poilievre personally said no because he hasn't done anything for me today. But Mr. Éric Girard would be a great value in Quebec today to be able to reassure Canadians as we are facing this economic crisis, that he's got, somebody who understands the economy. We don't know simply who would be the finance minister, who would be the foreign affairs minister, who would be the public security minister. We don't know.
They're not partaking in any debates either, none of these candidates.
So we don't know. So that's a problem.
Okay. Well, listen, leave it to 3 journalists to choose only the fails, none of the wins.
Okay, the win. Can I give you one
Okay,
win?
what's the win?
It's not the campaign. It's the lady who has become a meme in the rally, the current Liberal rally. And
the one about lead us through daddy or something?
Lead us, Big Daddy. She gave us all a good laugh. Come on.
Okay, she gave us a good laugh.
That's all.
Here's my win, the 3 of you. Thank you very much. Bob, Tonda, JD, thank you. Well, before we go tonight, we do want to get back to the story that we began with today, that temporary shutdown of the CAMI assembly plant in Ingersoll, Ontario. All party leaders are now responding, releasing statements late today. They expressed their sadness at the news, and Pierre Poilievre was the first to release a statement. It went on to say, in part, a Conservative government will push hard to put an end to these tariffs and get a quick but fair deal that protects our sovereignty and our economy. President Trump is betraying America's closest friend and attacking our economy. We must strengthen our economy and end our reliance on the United States. Again, that from Pierre Poilievre. Now, as for the Liberal leader, Mark Carney, this is what he goes on to say in part. My government is fighting to defend our auto sector, protect our workers, and build our supply chains in Canada. We've made it easier for affected workers to access support, including waiving the EI waiting period. Whichever government Canadians choose in this important election, Canada is ready to negotiate with the United States from a position of strength. And finally, Jagmeet Singh releasing this statement. He says it is time to put workers and jobs at the heart of Canada's tariff fight back plan, to raise EI so it actually covers the bills, and to launch the Build Canadian, Buy Canadian action plan to keep more workers on the job. It is shocking, he says, and wrong that these things haven't already happened. New Democrats stand with working people, and we won't stop fighting alongside them. So, of course, we'll keep tracking the story for you right here on CPAC and on Primetime Politics as this campaign does continue. But for this Friday evening, that is Primetime Politics. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. We're back next week. Until then, have a great weekend.